Okay, thank you very much for coming along. Appreciate your time today. We're going to be talking about mastering SQL Server migrations to AWS. We'll be looking at some of the strategies and best practices to implement. My name is John Martin. I'm a technical training manager with Redgate Software at the moment. My contact details are there. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on GitHub. If you've got any questions after the case, feel free to drop me an email as well. Always happy to answer any questions. I've been working with Microsoft Data Platform, SQL Server, and the data side of things for 20-odd years now in one form or another, spending time working with tools like SQL Server, Redshift, Snowflake, any number of solutions. Learned a lot of things on how to use them and how not to use them over those years. I'll be presenting with Yogi.
My name is Yogi Barrett. So my name is Yogi Barrett. I'm a Microsoft Worldwide Specialist Tech Leader at AWS, and I've been working with AWS from last 4.5 years, and before that I have 25+ years of industry experience working with Microsoft workloads, especially SQL Server. I'm from Canada, so you will hear a lot of stories about Canadian customers in our presentation. So what I do is I help customer migrate and modernize their SQL Server workload to cloud. So that was my previous role, but again, in the new role, it's kind of something similar, but instead of SQL Server, the whole Microsoft technical stack, migration and modernization. That's about myself.
Cool.
I have.
Cool. So what we're going to be talking about in some detail today, cloud migration strategies. And that's the important thing, really, is understanding what sort of mechanism are we going to use, how are we going to move to the cloud. There's various different options available to us, and they come with positives and some challenges, depending on which sort of workload you have, is obviously going to then dictate which one's going to be the most appropriate for you. We'll break down the overall migration process into the 3 key stages that we have. So we'll start thinking about the preparation, the assessment stage, understanding your workload, the environment, how that then has a bearing on that overall migration strategy choice. We'll look at the options as well for actually migrating your SQL Server databases from wherever they are up to AWS Cloud. We'll start talking about some of the post-migration tasks as well. So you start thinking, when you've got that data in the cloud, how do we operate effectively? How do we optimize? How do we modernize? And through the course of the session as well, we'll sort of come up with some tips and tricks, some tools as well we'll start looking at that may be available for you to look at using. So with that, if I hand over to Yogi.
So let's talk about why even customers are migrating that SQL Server to AWS, right? Who here is not looking for a good deal when you go for shopping, right? So we always want to make sure that we get the cheapest and the best deal. Thanksgiving is coming up, and we want to go rush and get the best deal, right? Same thing we think from our customer point of view. We help them lower the TCO. So cost is always a conversation starter when they start migrating for SQL Server workload. Typically, you can save up to 45%, up to 77%, depends on your licensing situation. If you are bringing your license, you can save more. Regardless of that, we can help you save your over total cost of ownership for SQL Server workload. Second reason is like higher performance and reliability. So as you can realize, there is when we look, not we actually, third party did the analysis about the downtime that AWS has compared to other clouds. We are much reliable, like 98% reduction in unplanned downtime. We are 71% faster deployment and 26% higher developer productivity. So AWS delivers 2 times better price performance and 62% lower cost for SQL Server workloads. So for this reason, customer would consider migrating their SQL Server workload to AWS. Also, we have a flexible licensing options. I'm always telling my customer, if you have made existing investment, show us what you have it. Tell us what you have it. Do you have enterprise standard? How many core? How many CPU? Server-based license? Cal-based license? What you have got? And I work with them to give them an optimal costing and pricing, an optimal architecture that utilize that license already. So if you have made an investment, then why do you want to spend again, right? So looking at the flexible licensing options will make a good choice for you. If you don't have anything, if you're like a startup, starting your own company, you can just go pay as you go licensing model with per minute billing. So we have flexible options. Easy to use experience with reduced complexity, right? So We have management tools like an AWS License Manager free tool, AWS System Manager free tool for your operationals and patch management. So we have a lot of ways for you to help you easier administration of your SQL database. Broadest and deepest capability, like we've been running SQL Server. Last year, if you are at the pass, the t-shirt that we hand over, it says 15 years of experience for running SQL Server on cloud, right? This is our 16 years, so we have been longer than any other cloud provider providing SQL Server services to the customers. And in fact, I was talking earlier this year, talking to the world's largest SQL Server database and helping them architecting, breaking the whole large 20 years of data and how they can migrate that to AWS. Right? So customer still choose AWS as their primary cloud. Like just recent study done by Gartner, and 52% of the people consider moving that workload to cloud, and all other cloud providers were like around 16 to 18%, right? So that's where AWS stands for SQL Server workload. So we have the deepest and broadest capability. At the same time, agility from SQL Server modernization, right? So when we talk about SQL Server, I've been using SQL from SQL 7, right? But before that, I was using Oracle 7. So I came from Oracle to SQL, and then I became a Postgres architect at one point as well, right? So we have to keep moving as the technology moves. You cannot just say, I'm going to be stuck with Oracle DBA, and then I'm not going to learn new things, right? In your career growth, you have to keep learning, right? So for SQL Server, what's the next step? You have to modernize to a cloud-native database like PostgreSQL, Aurora, or MySQL, or move to a service which is the best fit for your requirement, because some data can be good for timestamp database. Some data can be good for DynamoDB as well, right? So don't just assume everything is in relational database. JSON can be stored on S3 as well. So or document DB, right? So depends where you want to put your data. It all depends on your data type, the usage pattern, and there are so many other things that you have to consider before you just say, okay, I want to put everything on SQL Server. I have a customer example. So for example, Salesforce, they migrated their marketing cloud to AWS. We know Salesforce is our biggest customer. We all use Salesforce, even internally as well. So one of the biggest improvement they got, like they have this deploying the cluster. Generally, it used to take them 3 to 4 months for on-premise data center. Now, it only takes them 4 hours on AWS. So you get an scalability, you get an availability, and you get that high performance with moving to AWS. In fact, I'm doing a session in AWS reInvent, and it's an AWS conference in Las Vegas in December with a customer and their customer migration journey to AWS. In that, they are literally saying that within 6 months, they grew their business so much. It's like a 200% growth because they use a cloud-native infrastructure. They don't need to worry about buying a new server, making sure the servers is the right size, making sure the memory and CPU utilization. Like there's so many things you need to consider before you migrate to cloud. We will cover all of that, but I'm just going to pass it on to John to talk more about the planning phase.
So we start thinking about the planning and assessment phases. They are going to drive the decision that we make around the migration strategy. And we start thinking about the 7 R's. So in this sort of scenario, we have what we term the 7 R's of cloud migration. And we start with the most fundamental, rehosting, lifting and shifting. Okay? Essentially, we take what we have on premises and we look to replicate that up in the cloud. We're using virtual machines on premises, bare metal servers. We're going to look to move to EC2, that type of thing. Okay? Probably one of the easiest routes to go. But again, it's one of those things, it's just taking what I've got and putting it there. It's not optimized, it's not been resized, cost optimized, that type of thing. I mean, have you got any sort of thoughts, examples about where it works, where it doesn't work?
Yeah, so for first option, most of the customer, even though you said it's just an easy one, just lift and shift. It's that easy. Basically, you take a virtual machine from on-premise, or whether it's in VMware, SQL Server on VMware as well, you can lift and shift to AWS on EC2. You get the same operating system access, you get the full database access within sysadmin right, you can bring your license, and everything as it is, status quo. all your jobs, SSIS, packages, and everything is as it is, right? So that's a first step that customer migrate is do lift and shift.
So then we think about the second one, refactoring. Now, when we say refactoring here, we're looking at replatforming. So we're still fundamentally looking at the same sort of architecture, but we could be going to, we'll go up to RDS instead, that type of thing. So again, it's very similar. It's something that we're familiar with. Many of the processes will be the same, potentially, as sort of rehosting if we're just looking at the database engine scope, the backup restore, that type of thing. I mean, again, do you think any examples that you can think of there for customers?
Yeah, definitely. So with RDS SQL Server, I was talking to customer yesterday, right here from conference. So when I was talking to customer, they said, we want to move, they're running on-premise, but they want to move to RDS because they are running an older version of SQL Server, they are running a standard edition, and now they want to move to an AWS with an high availability solution built in. The DBA doesn't want to spend time in upgrading the database, testing, and all these things, setting up an always-on availability group, mirroring, things like that. They're like not sure what kind of HA and DR they would achieve. So I was just talking to them, okay, let's do an RDS SQL Server. It's a managed service. You get an automated backup. You get an automated monitoring. You get an automated patching. And now upgrade, you can have your SQL Server running with the newer latest version that you want. You can set your DB into the compatibility mode. In case your application has not done the testing, you can still run with the lower compatibility. And when ready, you can just change that compatibility level, right? So with that, the customer does not need to worry about all these things, how I'm going to migrate. So it's still SQL database engine, right? So it's still SQL Server, standard, enterprise, all this. Even we have RDS custom as well that allows you to have some customization, which is not there on RDS SQL Server. But that's kind of re-platforming. You are moving away. So basically, you are still taking the bottle. You are not taking the bottle from here to here. You are just taking a water from the bottle and moving into another bottle, right? But the data, the databases, everything stays as it is.
So then we can think about revise, re-architect. And this is where we start to get in a little bit deeper. So we start to think about, okay, well, we're going to use sort of a similar adjacent technologies, that type of thing. We start looking at potentially re-architecting some of our application, decomposing things down. I mean, you spoke earlier about where you helped a customer decompose their sort of 20-year-old database down. I mean, again, just thinking that's really sort of what we're thinking about there is, can we go to adjacent technologies, break it down, microservices, take a massive monolith and change it, potentially even consolidate it back. So there's a number of different options that we have there. Anything you want to add on? No, cool. So next one, rebuild, redevelop. This is really the big one. I think you described this probably better than I can.
Yeah, so when you, for SQL Server redevelopment and rebuild, right? So you can move SQL to a cloud native database like Amazon Aurora for Postgres or MySQL, or maybe move to some of them to DynamoDB or Redshift. Depends on the data type, depends on the usage, depends on the application component. You can break them, right? So that requires more work. Obviously, because moving away from SQL Server, now you're saying that I'm going to take this water and maybe probably portion of it, convert into some juices, and then put it into another container, right? Something like that. So that requires more testing, more work, but long term, that's like it works out better for the customer because it gives you cost savings, it gives you better performance and better price as well.
So those are the real ones about getting the workload up into the cloud with the 7 Rs. Now we're into the back straight, we start thinking about the next final three. Replace, repurchase. Again, we're going to take what we've got and, well, I'm going to rebuy license, I'm going to move to different versions, I'm potentially going to buy a different application, that type of thing. So again, it's more about, I'm not going to take this necessarily to the cloud in its current form, we're going to do something quite drastic. The next option is retain and do nothing, which is a perfectly acceptable method.
How many of you worked with SQL 2000? Or you still have SQL 2000?
Yeah.
2005, no. 2008, 2012. Yeah, so yeah, we do have those end of support database, and sometimes depends on application. If you are proposing a business case to the business owner, they said, okay, I don't want to spend X number of dollar for migrating this application to a newer version. Let's just retire that. Keep it until it's running, and then we're going to retire one day. Or maybe have a new application deployed or developed in a cloud-grown application, and run in parallel and let this retire.
And then the last one is retire. We're not going to take it. We're modernizing our business. We're moving our processes. We're changing the way that we operate as a business, and we're just not going to bother with that application in the future. Okay. So those are the sort of 7 R's that we have when it comes to cloud migration. Those are the options. And some of the decision points that you've got there around what's the workload size, what are the versions, the database engines, all of that sort of thing, how's the application built, all of that will drive decision making when it comes to selecting which is the right mechanism that you use for taking that workload to the cloud. We're going to focus on the first 3 because they're the ones that are typically the most common. Now, before we move on to beyond the 7 R's, the 7 P's, I started my career back in defense in the UK, and this was a maxim that was drilled into a lot of us, and it's all about making sure that you're ready to do what you're going to be doing. You can just, we'll wing it, off you go. Doesn't really work very well in most cases. If you don't go and do proper planning, preparation, and practice, it's going to prevent a poor performance. And that's the plan. It's really a case of, all right, go and do your research, check your numbers, make sure that you understand what you're going to be doing. I want to move this from here to there, and I think this technique we're going to do it. Okay, we'll practice it. Because if you don't practice it, there's no guarantee. You can just write it all down on paper and then come up to it on day 1, and you go through the steps and it blows up. It's not a great scenario. You know, I've worked through multiple migrations in the past, and some of them have been a case of, here's the list on you go, John. Like, okay, not a problem. And I've realized I'm the person that's running it for the first time. It's not a great scenario. So this sort of maxim really sort of sits with me. It's a mindset and a way of thinking. So there's no technique per se, but it really is the right sort of mindset to adopt. And if you sort of look at this and you present that back to the business as well, use this to drive behavioral change within the business, because a lot of the time you'll get the sort of JDI request to just do it. And it's like, really? It's not going to be the most appropriate way to do this. If we do it like this, we do the planning and everything like that, you get everybody on the same page, that sort of mindset, that cultural approach, it means you end up with a greater chance of success. So, with that, we'll start thinking about the migration timeline itself, okay? First step, we're coming along, and it's going to be the plan, okay? Start there. This is where I'm going to come in, and we're going to say, okay, well, what's the scope? How do we arrive at that? That's the important piece. Is this just going to be a single database? Is it going to be multiple databases, multiple servers? What goes in and constitutes the scope of the migration? Not only for the data footprint, the workload complexity, but potential costs, potential software versions, all of that sort of stuff. We need to go in and understand those. We also start setting the objectives, understand what they are, manage expectations with the business. Again, the migration is not just a technology activity. It's fundamentally a PR exercise as well. I mean, how many people here have had we're going to do some work over the weekend on the system. Work gets canned. Someone comes in on Monday morning. Oh, it's running slow. It must have been what you did at the weekend. I didn't do anything at the weekend. I mean, I've been there many, many times.
And everyone says it's a database fault. It's something that you did at the DB, now it doesn't work.
Exactly. So it's that one of the things, you've got to go in, you set the objectives. What is the objective for the business? Is it purely technologically? Is it process-driven? We're going to do a transformation. Or is it also cost savings, cost optimization, things like that? Because again, that's going to drive which sort of mechanism we look at for taking the workload to the cloud. And we also start doing the analysis and assessment. What are the metrics? How is it performing? What's the size? What's the scale? Transactional throughput? All of these things. I mean, you start thinking about, okay, it's using this much CPU, this much storage, this much throughput. But then also you need to go deeper still. It's like if it's a big workload on SQL Server, I mean, how much TempDB is it using? There's a friend of mine put up a blog post via LinkedIn about TempDB contention that he's seeing in SQL Server product at the moment because of the number of objects that are being created. And again, it's understanding if that's part of your workload, then that's going to form part of your testing process for saying, okay, I need to replicate that and make sure that when I get there, do I need to optimize things?
I have one tip for TempDB actually to remind me. So if you're planning your deployment on EC2 or even RDS, try to put on instance which has an D at the R5D, which has D in the instance name. The reason why D will have an extra NVM storage. Its NVM is we call it as a ephemeral storage. So just like the storage is attached directly to the EC2 instance, it's a free storage you get. So for example, 4x large, you get around 1 terabyte of free storage. And that free storage is, the nature of it is when you stop and start, the data doesn't persist. Data goes away. So it's an ephemeral storage. So best thing to put your 10 DB over there. That gives you 100,000 IOPS. It's really, really fast. So I always tell my customers running SQL on EC to try to pick an instance which has D, and that instance will have an ephemeral storage. For example, X2ID. That instance has ephemeral storage, or R5D has an R6D that has an ephemeral storage. So with that, when you put your TempDB over there, two advantages. You don't need that CPU to do a lot of computation load, because now TempDB is running on the faster drive. Second thing, IOPS does not count for the instance IOPS. So that way, you don't need to pay that for high IOPS for that instance. So both way you can say. Exactly.
No bursting.
No bursting, yeah.
So yeah, that's really important to understand. Again, understand that by understanding what your existing performance metrics are. Then we start thinking about the preparation phase. And this is really where we start thinking about, okay, well, what is the migration strategy? I've done the analysis. I know what the profile is. Let's pick which one we're going to try, okay? Then we start going into the practice phase. Okay, I've picked this, we're going to do a lift and shift, or we're going to do the refactor, or whatever it is. We start practicing it, okay? We start breaking it down, understanding what those steps are, okay? Documenting the process is also very, very important at this stage, okay? Reason being, how many people here don't have to fill in change control requests when you want to do something to change the profile, essentially, of a system or make a change? Yay, good. Change control is important. As much as I hate it, it also makes my life a lot easier. But documentation is key, because that supporting documentation is what will bring those people along on that journey and also help prevent objections. Okay, so making sure that's comprehensive as we can. Automate activities as well. By the time we get into that practice element, okay, well, what can we automate? Are we going to use third-party services? Are we going to use PowerShell jobs, Bash, scripting? What are we going to do? Automate it. The reason I say automate it is, being a little human, I make mistakes. I've done lots of stuff manually over the time, whether it's a typo here or I've forgot to highlight the where clause there. Humans are fallible. We make mistakes, how we learn. I've learned a lot over the years. So the more we can automate, if I've run it 10 times before, I know that if I run it another 10 times, it's going to behave the same, okay? That makes life a lot easier, and again, links back into the change control process. You've got that confidence with the business. One of the things as well during preparation that really gets overlooked, and having been a manager at an organization where we insourced our IT that had been outsourced for a long, long period of time, training often gets overlooked. Preparing your people to operate and manage the platform once you're on it is key. And that needs to be taken into consideration when you start thinking about a cloud migration as well. There's lots of great free training, the certification pathways.
Oh, that is a big one actually, because even when myself, first time telling my story, I know we are, short story. When I started thinking about moving to cloud, like it was Microsoft Azure was the first cloud when I took a training. And my husband was telling me from last 2 years, you must learn about Azure, you must learn about this. And I was trying to, I'm fine. I was like lazy DBA, I copy paste, like do deployment, backup restore. I don't want to learn the new technology, right? So at that time, it was so difficult for me to come out of my lazy mindset and try to learn something new. But as I started learning, I loved the cloud terminology like compute section, database, and this is storage and networking and VPC. I had to expand my horizon from DBA to become a more like an architect and learn all different pieces that fits in. And it was fun learning together. It was fun learning, and this is how I got myself into the cloud, is giving a certification exam. That's the best way for you, because if you force yourself to learn the curriculum, that way you know that you certified and you learn the things required for this cloud, right? So that's how I decide my path.
Yep.
to learn the cloud.
Much.
And I think most of the staff is like, at that time, my team, we had like a small team, 4 people in the team. And I inspire everyone to become certified. I said, you must give the certification. I'm going to do lunch and learn. If you don't understand, tell me, but I want you to go that route. Now all of them are so happy that they came to cloud journey, right? So it's just the first step yourself, and then pushing other people in the team to start learning about new technology, because change is a fear. No one wants to change from what they are, right?
So yeah, I mean, like I say, as being a manager of a team that we built, making sure that I enabled my people for success was very, very important. If you are not a manager, but you're a member of those teams, push back and say, I need this training as well. One of the really important things to understand at these 2 phases as well is do not be afraid to go backwards, okay? Failure is an option at this stage. Understand if something does not work, do not continue plowing ahead with it. Go back, understand, what do I need to change? My approach, the methodology, all of these things. Adjust the plan, adjust the documentation, and then move forwards again. This is cyclic and iterative. Get it right, and then when we get into the migrate phase, we can be assured of a greater level of success. And this is where we're looking at moving resources, configuring the workload, validating the migration success against those sort of success criteria we've defined, whether it's test automation, things like that. I mean, do you want to talk to this point? Or
We'll cover it.
You'll cover it in a bit, and actually you've got a whole section on the migrate piece. Then we get into operate, and this is the fun one. This is where we want to make sure that once we're there, we make sure monitoring's configured. You want to understand how it's working and behaving. Ideally, you've been monitoring it effectively beforehand. Now we're up there. So you've got evidence when someone says, oh, it's running slowly. Well, it's not the database. We're running fine. We've got plenty of capacity or what have you. Maintenance operations as well. Do they change when you get to the cloud? If you've done the refactoring or replatforming, how does that impact things? What mechanisms are you using? You may have used SQL agent jobs in the past. Is there a different way you'll be doing that when you get to the cloud as well? But also now to start thinking about operating it, right-sizing it. Cloud costs. On-premises costs as well, but it's normally a big upfront cost where I'm planning for a period of years. And once that cost has vanished, you don't see the monthly bill. Now we're in the cloud, we'll see a monthly bill. Now as a DBA, effectively looking at that and operating in the cloud, I want to be looking for those expensive queries. I want to be looking for any overhead is unused. Can I bring that down, sort of bring it to make it more efficient? If I can do that, then there's a tangible saving for the business on the bottom line every month, which you can then take through to your review or anything like that to justify things. Then we move forward into the optimize phase. And this is where, again, you're thinking about cloud-native technologies, okay? If we were into EC2, can we move to RDS? Can we move to something that's a little bit more managed? That side of things, okay? What capability we've got for automation, scaling, that type of thing. FinOps principles, now I say FinOps, this is really a case of I'm taking the operation of my platform, I'm looking at costs every single day. There's one company I used to work for, a colleague of mine ticked the box and ended up with £30,000 bill in a week, because he ticked the wrong box and turned on something without change control, and we got a shock. But we didn't see that until someone reviewed the bill at the end of the month. So you really want to be looking for those sort of deviations in cost very, very early on. Optimizing, it's a continual sort of process. Anyone here using ITIL or frameworks like that of continuous service improvement delivery? Have a look at it. It's all about assessing and then feeding that back, similar to sort of the DevOps culture. We assess and bring all of that knowledge back in, we make changes, deploy them, and monitor and go forwards and forwards again. So that was the timeline. Now we're going to talk in a little bit more depth about the pre-migration, this sort of analyze, assess, plan, and practice. Scope. Okay, if we think about the system migrate, I said the scope is very important, okay? We want to understand dependencies, okay? We start thinking about what do we depend on, what depends on us. And this is where you want to start thinking about processes, okay? You want to think about other technology platforms and systems. You want to start thinking about licensing, all of this sort of stuff. Those things that come into what do we need to manage, what do I need to do in order to make sure this is operating effectively.
So not only that, you also need to check about the SQL Server to SQL Server dependency. Like last week I was talking to a customer, they said, hey, I'm having some performance issue, can you help me troubleshoot? And I was asking, okay, what is your architecture? So they have on-premise SQL Server, they have SQL Server on cloud, and they have a constant communication going between them. Now imagine on-premise, both were together running on same rack. Here is like you are in a and thousands of miles away, wherever your SQL server is, you can't have a continuous communication going back and forth. You will definitely have some kind of network bottleneck over there, right? So when you plan the dependency, I advise them, I want you to move both servers, which is talking to each other, plan in a group, and move that together rather than just putting one on cloud and one on premise, right? So plan in such a way, group your servers like all dev environment, maybe all testing environment, or productions, set of applications that interact together, plan a dependency, and then use that to migrate in the cloud together in a different ways.
So yeah, and just building on that as well, you start thinking about, okay, we've got an application that's dependent on the database server. You want to also go into them and say, well, which version of the SQL Server drivers are they using, things like that for connectivity. I've had scenarios in the past where people have upgraded the SQL Server version as part of the migration, and the old drivers that come with the Windows operating system on the app server weren't upgraded, and performance fell off an absolute cliff. So again, you've got to start thinking it's not just the database migration. We need to start thinking, well, we also need to look at the application piece and the drivers and dependencies that have. You also think about inputs and outputs. If we're consuming data and outputting data, what format is it coming in from? Where is it coming from? What are the storage components around that? Is it going into a file share? If it's someone putting SFTP in, and we've got integration services jobs moving data in, or I'm pushing reporting services reports out, things like that. Understand those components as well, the input and the output. So what's above, below, left, and right. Understand the training components, we covered that already. And again, the success criteria. And this is an interesting one for that is, I tend to keep success criteria very clear, not long and wordy, things like that. So if you can attribute values to them as well, sort of smart objectives, makes them focused, makes it easy for you to justify, yeah, we've met our targets effectively, okay? Ambiguity is bad when it comes to defining success criteria, because then you'll potentially have someone, if they've got an agenda, they'll come back and say, actually, no, we want to do that. The reality is, I've succeeded, I've hit all the success criteria, we've met those metrics, and we're on. Now, analyzing and assessing, put my teeth back in there, sorry. Understand the resource usage profiles, okay? Now this, again, is going to define which strategy we're going to use, but right-sizing the target environment as well. If I've got a 32-core server with 2 terabytes of RAM on premises, because I bought it with a 6-year projected lifespan, but the reality is I'm using about 20% of my CPU utilization, and my page life expectancy is measured in eons. The reality is I probably don't need that server when I get to the cloud. I can potentially look at bringing that back down, okay? Now, one of the things to really think about when you are looking at that is the type of workload you've got. OLTP workloads will tend to be a little bit less prone to having issues if you're consolidating the number of cores, okay? So long as you've got the ability and they can still operate independently and you've got the capacity in there to be able to do the switching on the CPUs and what have you, OLTP workloads can be a little bit less sensitive to reducing that core count. Analytics workloads, when you think about wide parallel queries, can be adversely affected. So you'll see a lot of the tools from old virtualization vendors and things like that were saying, oh, we can do consolidation at this and what have you, and you go back to 2 vCPUs and it's fine. The reality is I'm coming with 8 from an analytics workload. I need 8 because that's how SQL Server is spreading them out for the multiple threads. You go to 2 and performance is like, meh, not great, okay? Again, pre-work needed, desirable. If I've got a lot of very expensive queries that are taking up a lot of resources, can I optimize those before I do the migration to the cloud as well? Reason being, you minimize that performance overhead that you've got through those inefficient queries. It's going to cost you less when you get to the cloud. Or do you want to do that, put them on the backlog, and I'll work on them when I'm there as part of the modernization and the optimization phase. But identify them, log them, document them, put them in a backlog, okay? It's going to be that sort of continuous service improvement. And then again, thinking about those high-level migration activities, break them down, plans, who is going to be doing that with you, what are the anticipated timescales, practice it, dry run as much as you can. Once you've got that documented, you know that we're going to fit into these windows. These people need to be available with these skill sets at these particular times, okay? So, thinking about some potential tools. On the free and open source side, anyone here heard of PAL, Performance Analysis Log Tool? Yay. I love that tool. All my many moons ago when I worked back with Microsoft as a CSS engineer and things like that, PAL was one of the things I've used to just chomp through perf mod logs. Makes my life a lot easier. Clint did a great job. I get little graphs, I get a nice HTML report, it highlights the things I need to go and look at. SQL Nexus, again, with RML utilities, and SQL Diag, PSS Diag, again, really good for going in, drilling in, getting a lot of deep insight data, well worth having a look at. Nexus is not the most friendly tool to use, in my experience. It's great for targeted use cases. I want to go in, I want to tune something, I want to diagnose a particular problem. Same with PAL, it's really good for that. What they're not great for is that continuous monitoring over longer periods of times and so on and so forth, and that's where third-party tools like things like Redgate Monitor, Toolbell, AWS OLA, or Application Discovery Service, these tools that come in will give you a little bit more scope as well, okay? So again, think about those, how they work. I don't know if you want to, we're going to cover some of those, aren't we, in the next section, so. The final thing at this point, we will,
No, this
So-
one is just for the pre-migration assistant.
Yeah.
With migration, we're
So-
going to
yeah.
cover in the next section.
yeah, we'll cover the next section.
Assessment, yeah.
Yeah. So these are the tools that I would use to go in and say, okay, what are the performance? How much CPU am I using? How much memory? What's my page life expectancy? How much
So
I/O throughput?
Yeah, for example,
It's not for the,
It's not for moving things,
No.
no,
So
not
for-
yet.
not for the assessment, like what kind of function you have if you want.
yeah, so for example, AWS Application Discovery Service that allows you to, it's going to discover your applications, group the applications based on the software and what's been deployed, and then suggest you an migration path for those, right?
Yeah.
And AWS OLA is an optimizing and licensing assessment. It's going to do for your SQL Server, any Windows workload, even Linux workload, whole data center migration. Basically, you run it for a couple of weeks. It looks at the existing usage pattern, and from that, it suggests you a right sizing. So it doesn't. So if you have a 16 vCPU implemented on premise, it also looks at the generation of the instance that you have, Intel process, which processor, what generation, and accordingly it right size give you a right instance type on AWS. So basically,
Baseline, what are your.
exactly.
But I want to know what kind of tools can, for example, I want to move my SQL to.
We'll cover that in the next section. So the question is what tools can help with the migration part. We'll cover that in the next section. Yogi's going to talk to that section. The key assessment metrics as part of this and that I tend to use and these are the ones that I really look at. Authentication and authorization. SQL authentication, Entra ID authentication, or Active Directory as it was once known. And depends on what marketing are calling it this particular week. If you're going with SQL authentication, does that also then mean you start thinking about secret manager or secret management as a concept for additional services that may need to sit in a halo around it for the application services to be able to connect through, configuration manager, that type of thing, Entra? How do you set up and synchronize your entities and identities onto the appropriate ones?
So these are the good metrics not only for migration, even after migrating, if you want to monitor your SQL Server, these are the metrics that you have to generally monitor for SQL Server as well.
And obviously in the SQL, in the AWS side of things, we've got the IAM elements that you want to map that through to as well and understand how that's going to work. From a compute perspective, CPU utilization, very, very key there. You want to look not only at the overall CPU utilization, how that breaks down, understand your processes, your query utilization as well. Ideally, multiple threading within a query, how does that going to be impacted potentially? Parallel queries. Memory, page life expectancy. Now, this is a contentious one. Question.
On the pre-assessment, do you recommend to over-provision the compute, or like you said, you find out what processor you have, what speed you have, and you migrate, is that going to be a similar one, or do you have enough room for the overhead?
Okay, so the question is, when you're doing the migration planning and scoping, do you over-provision your CPU as part of the migration? Personally, no. I would look to say what is going to be the right size to land at so that I'm looking at cost optimization from day one.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I would not suggest to over-provision at all. The reason why, on-premise, we always had over-provision because we don't have a easy way to upgrade more, add more CPU, add more memory. We want ask for like, give me enterprise edition, give me this. Like we always ask for the higher states because we know it's a one-time investment. On AWS, you can go with just Xlarge. Start with Xlarge. If your workload doesn't work, in next 2 minutes, change to 2x large, right? You
All
can.
the way too, right?
Ah.
People are so panic migrating to the cloud, right? So they panic.
So that's why you need to do this assessment before. So when you do the optimizing and licensing assessment, that checks your existing workload pattern, right? So, and that right size after looking at your workload, right? So that is the key. And then if you go based on that, I said like customer have mostly saved 45% to 75%, depends on their usage pattern, right? Always go right size, don't over provision. You can, in case if you have performance problem, you can always increase this. But SQL Server is paid based on number of vCPU license. Why you want to pay like double license from the beginning? Why you want to over provision? You at the same time, like if you have multi-AZ, without even impacting production, you can change your EC2 instance size, just one single reboot. Then why you want to pay extra?
And this comes back to the planning and preparation phase. Practicing it, testing it, get your success criteria that define your key metrics for performance. That's what you need to hit. You're not going to just do it and, yeah, we're there. It's a case of, right, we'll do that, we'll test the workloads, we'll test those queries. Now, the workload side of things is more, from a high level, I can take a smaller system and I can say, I'll make a change, and if that impacts it by 10% overhead, then I can make an assumption that the same configuration change in production, I can see a potential 10% overhead. So think about that. You don't always have to go like for like, but you want to test it, you want to practice with it, you want to verify performance before you turn it on with production. And that's when you get to the operational side, that's where the monitoring comes in and making sure you've got eyes on it. So you are babysitting it in a sort of hypercare sort of scenario. So cool. Anyway, quickly back to the pieces here. Page life expectancy. Whilst it's a memory counter, as far as SQL Server is concerned, the reality is it's a storage counter.
So do we know what is page life expectancy here?
Yep. All happy with
Everyone
that?
knows that, right?
So yeah, essentially, I've got X amount of memory and I'm churning through it in that period of time. The reality is that should be tracking through to how much I/O am I driving for my memory configuration. If it's measured in eons, the reality is, can I bring that down and still get a performance that is acceptable by driving more I/O? Okay. That's a mindset to look at when you get to the cloud, because obviously you'll save yourself some more money by coming down in size, and if you can maintain the level of performance because the I/O subsystem is able to handle it. A good example.
I have a lot of example for PLE, because when I asked my customer, what's your PLE, they said, I don't know, let me check, how do I find it? Then I give them this is how you find it. And they come back to me, the numbers is ideally, this is what I tell, it's 5 minutes, right? Microsoft 5 minutes, 300 seconds. So it has to be 300 seconds, okay? And when I get the result back from customer, it's not in seconds, it's in minutes, it's in hours, it's in days, right? That means they are way over allocated their memory, and they are still saying, I need more memory. I need an instance which like 1 terabyte of memory for 1 terabyte of database. I said, you don't need that whole DB to fit in memory. Right, so with the, as what John mentioned, with the high powerful I/O subsystem, you don't need that much memory. So I just said, just please check your PLE, and then we'll come back and discuss how much memory you need.
So I mean, I've worked with a customer in the past as well. Now, their page life expectancy was 300 on a terabyte of RAM. But the I/O subsystem was way over-spec'd, which is a great, it's a blessing in disguise. It was performing well, the subsystem was working, but the reality is there's only so much flash that was available in their array. So really that was a case of we need to optimize this type of system as well, understand how we're going to do it. So that's going to come back to your workload as well. Storage, again, we talk about capacity, throughput, IOPS. Now, depending on the type of system you're using, you're going to see throttling depending on which bit of storage you're using. As Yogi touched on earlier, if you're using the D suffix machines, then you're going to get the ephemeral NVMe, which doesn't have IOPS consideration or IOPS throttling based around the instance size as well. So think about how that's going to work for you. And then we've got networking, which becomes very important in the cloud. Throughput, latency, application locations. Those are good not only from a performance and workload perspective, but also when you think about multiple regions, the transfer between them can have costs as well. So if you've got your application in one region and if you've got data based in another region, then that could be something that you want to avoid because you've got
So data in the cloud is always free, but as soon as you move out of the cloud, you will be charged, right? Even between the AZs, between the regions, there is also data transfer cost. So you need to, in your solution architecture, you need to make sure you check that.
Okay. So with that, that's been the that's been the assessment phase. What we'll do now is we'll start thinking about the actual migration phase, which I think Yogi's going to lead us on. Sorry.
All right, so you asked the question earlier about how do you migrate your SQL Server, right? So let's talk about different ways to migrate the SQL Server. There are multiple ways, but are we showing the right screen?
If you click onto the next one, yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
Perfect. So there are multiple ways, but these are the top 5 that most of our customer prefer. Number 1 is backup and restore. AWS Application Migration Service, always on AG. We'll talk about the AWS Database Migration Service as well as the AWS Migration Hub Orchestrator. So I will talk about all 5 options in detail. We'll go through the pros and cons and the use cases of each option. So let's talk about the number 1 options, backup and restore. The reason why it's listed number 1, it's a number 1 used option by all our customers because it's an easy one. It follows the native backup and restore. DB has been using for many years, so you don't need to learn any new tool. It allows you to do full backup, differential, incremental, and transactional log backup. You can go up to 5 minutes. The cutover time depends on your transaction log frequency, and it works for RDS SQL Server, it works for RDS Custom, it works for EC2, so it works for all destination. That's the advantage of this. What's the disadvantage of this? This is a DB level. So if you have like hundreds of database, thousands of database on a server, you need to probably script this out and migrate in a bulk. We have the last tool that I will be talking, it's going to do that automation. But this is just general backup restore. If you have like 1 or 2 database, 4, 5, single digit, you can manage it yourself and migrate it to AWS. This is again the whole DB. It covers all user database, all objects, everything. Second method is an application migration service. So for this method, this is a lift and shift, right? So earlier I mentioned taking a virtual machine. This virtual machine might have a Windows server deployed. It might have applications on it. It might have some stored folder on it. It might have SQL Server, everything. So it's going to lift and shift, put everything using block level migration and migrate replicate to AWS. This method is used for rapid migration method. This is the most frequently used by our customers who just want to do lift and shift. I have a data center exit. I want to finish migration in 3 months. I want to finish migration in 1 month. I have seen the customer with migrating their whole data center in 1 month with this method, right? Typically, migration varies between 3 months to 18 months, depends on the number of servers they have in data center. But with application migration service, it allows you to do lift and shift, block level migration. You can do changes as well. So you do full migration, just like a full backup. And then you can do incremental as well, snapshots. You can schedule whenever you're ready to cut over, you can just cut over at that time. So your production is still up and running intact. You can easily go back because production is up and running, and here you are doing the same lift and shift migration. And advantage is it covers the whole server level. So anything on the server gets migrated. So it's a much easier method, but the disadvantage of this method, if you have Windows 2012, if you have SQL 2012, if you want to upgrade, if you have legacy component, it's going to come over everything together, right? Because it's a lift and shift. So if you want to upgrade, there's still option with that. You migrate as it is with the legacy component, and we have an AWS System Manager automation that you can run on top of that instance to upgrade after you migrate. But it's an additional automation that you have to run. So that's the second method. Third method is migrating using a distributed availability group, right? So this method works for EC2. This method works also for RDS Custom. It doesn't work for RDS SQL Server because RDS SQL Server is a managed service. You don't have an access to create an always-on AG on top of it because it's an AWS managed. AWS will create an always-on AG on top of it. So for this method, good thing about this method is you have an HA setup, primary, secondary with synchronous replication on premise. You can just add one more replica to it, put it into the cloud on AWS with distributed availability group with asynchronous replication. Your transactions are already in sync. Whenever you want to cut over, within seconds, you can cut over. So that's an advantage of it. Disadvantage, it's an database level migration. Again, it's not the whole instance level migration. Disadvantage, you have to pay license for both primary, secondary on-premise, and also for another copy onto AWS. So this is an expensive method, but for customer, if they have a really low cutover time for migration, they can use this method. And the fourth method is using AWS Database Migration Service. So for this service, you can do heterogeneous migration. Yeah.
Question on the licensing on the remote copy. So I think it's as per Microsoft, if you are not actively using that.
Yeah, so you get 1 HA for free. Yeah, so if you're active passive, so if you are not using your replica in AWS, yeah, you can get that for free. If you have provided you have software assurance. If you have active software assurance with Microsoft, you can get 1 replica for free. Yeah, but that has to be inactive. You can't access that. So this option with AWS Database Migration Service, you can do heterogeneous migration. You can do homogeneous. So SQL to SQL, SQL to Postgres, Oracle to MySQL, DMS supports all kind of migration. This migration can be also automated. The downside of this migration is it will have a little bit overhead because it's reading your transaction logs, it's picking up the data from there, and it's migrating to AWS. So on source, you have some overhead. Second downside is, another good thing is this with migration of DMS, you can do whole database, or you can just pick and choose 2 tables. Like yesterday morning, I was talking to a customer, they had 2 terabytes of archive database, and their production was only 29 gigabytes, right? So I said, do you need to move everything from your archive database? And then someone said, no, I just need maybe top 5 tables. So in that case, I don't suggest any other method other than DMS. Because with DMS, they can pick and select only specific object, just like a transaction replication. You can select specific tables and only replicate that to AWS. So if you need an object level migration, I would say go for DMS. If you need a migration from SQL to Aurora, go for DMS. I would not suggest SQL to SQL direct migration for DMS if you are doing the whole database, right? So it depends on your use case. DMS again is good fit for incremental as well. So if you have a low cutover time, you can use DMS to replicate changes continuously. What I see customers using DMS for SQL Server is for DI solution, or maybe for a solution if they have a reporting need. They have a primary and they have a secondary, and they need a maybe subset of data going for data analytics to run their reporting need. They use DMS to move that data around, right? So DMS is a good tool. It has a lot of different use case migration and also sometimes for DR as well. Let's talk about this 5th option is AWS Migration Hub Orchestrator. With this option is basically allows you to do migration in a bulk. Say you have 100 SQL servers and you have 100 database on each. Now you want to migrate. So with Migration Hub Orchestrator, it provides you a platform to migrate your database as a scale, and you can create that profile. We say it as a profile for migration, and then you can reuse that process. You can create the pre-built workflow template, and you can reuse that. It runs on IDS, it runs on EC2. Basically, same option number 1, but automated, replicated, and using AWS tool. Right? So it's same, and in the backend, it still use backup and restore, but now you have a capability to do all together. You can scale it, you can group it, and you can do it in a much better control way. Okay, a good question. RDS for SQL Server, Amazon RDS for SQL Server is a managed service. With a managed service, you get a limitation that you don't have access to remote desktop. You can't have an Postgres driver installed on it. You can't have an sysadmin rights to it. So there are some limitation on RDS SQL Server. It's a managed service. But customer wanted to go for managed service. At the same time, they wanted to have an RDP rights. They want to install a third party. If they are using Datadog, they want to install Datadog onto this RDS instance. Or maybe they want to have an assay, their application need an assay rights. In that case, we came up with this product called RDS Custom. It allows you to have an EC2 similar experience, but it's a managed service.
So going back to your question earlier about mechanisms for moving to the cloud, are those all things that you looked at? Are you happy with that? Is there any questions about those before we move on?
Yeah, so
But there are a lot of functions that may, in a SQL, give a name on
I have that answer.
Yep. No, go for it. That's fine. We've
Go
got the
for
time.
it. Like,
Yep.
so basically, we have two tools. One is called schema conversion tool that converts your schema. It's a free tool. You can download. You can extract your DDL to a script. You can run it against schema conversion tool. Within minutes, it's going to give you an assessment that your SQL Server, mostly, I'm telling you based on experience working with AWS last 5 years, 80% of them should be fine. Tables should be fine, views should be fine. The issue you will come in stored procedure. And it's going to try to rewrite some of them, whatever it can do, optimize it. If not, it's going to flag it out saying that this stored procedure has this feature or this function cannot be converted to Postgres.
what kind of tool? I want to know what kind of tool that uses this kind of assessment.
What's the name of the tool, sorry?
Schema conversion tool.
Schema.
Conversion tool.
SCT,
Yeah.
schema conversion tool. And once you do that assessment, then you use this DMS to do the migrate from SQL to Postgres. We can talk later after
Yeah.
the session. I can give you more details.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean the SCT is good for not just those. It also works with the various other database platforms
Exactly,
as well
yeah.
for relational. So if you're doing those migrations, it can be very, very useful. Cool. There's also on the Aurora side as well. If you're going Postgres, there is Babelfish as an option, but that's
Yeah.
going to be highly dependent on the workload and the complexity of your queries.
So
again-
Babelfish is basically it's an extension of Amazon Aurora. So just in a simple language, me and you, we all speak multiple languages, right? English and whatever other language. So I can understand 2 languages, and depends on which language someone communicate with me, I answer back accordingly, right? Once I'm fluent in both language, I don't need to convert in my mind one language to another because I know the language, I can answer accordingly. So same thing, Babelfish is an Aurora extension that can understand SQL Server. It can understand Postgres as well. So you can write the code in Postgres, connect to Babelfish, and you can also write the code in SQL Server using T-SQL language using TDS endpoint on port 1433. You can run the SQL Server syntax as it is, DDL, DMLs onto Babelfish. So Postgres has a free open source product. So we have created our own extension using Postgres, and that extension is Babelfish, and that can understand SQL Server.
Thank you very much. So now we start thinking about the post-migration challenges with SQL Server workloads. I think this is a really good sort of thing when you start thinking about cost management. I mean, you've got a lot of
So
experience there.
main thing I've been like every customer after I migrate, what I do is help them optimize. This is where like I have succeeded so far is helping save cost for customers. Like I have saved millions of dollars for the customer post migration because that's main concern they have it. Like as you mentioned, over provision. And even if you insist so much that I don't need 64 CPU, your management said no, let's go as it is. I don't want to have users complaining, business complaining that cloud is bad performance. I need to have a good result showcased to my business and users saying that cloud is good. And after they run the bill for 1 month, 2 months, then they come back, hey, this is expensive, can we help, right? So that is a challenge.
I mean, the licensing terms as well, understanding what those are and the architectures you're putting in place, which services you're using, that type of thing are going to have a bearing on the licensing, especially with the SQL Server side of things, enterprise edition, standard edition, so on and so forth.
On that note, we don't have any script. If you go right now, Google, how to find an enterprise edition features, if you are using that onto SQL Server database, there is a Microsoft view called DB features enhancement, that's only DB level. But the whole SQL engine level, you don't have any script. But if you want, I have my script I can share you that can detect if you are running enterprise edition or not. Right, so that script you can run on-premise on AWS, RDS, EC2 anywhere, and that will tell you whether you're using enterprise edition feature or not.
So then we start thinking about the scalability, operational resilience. When we move to the cloud, if we've got on-premises, I've worked in environments before where I've had high availability within data centers. I've had disaster recovery across data centers. I've had businesses say, I want automatic DR, which in reality means I want multi-site HA. So these are all things that you need to start thinking about. Okay, well, what does the cloud facilitate now that I'm there? If you've done a lift and shift, now you start to move into the modernize and optimize phase. Is how can I leverage the additional capabilities of the AWS cloud to be able to say, well, I want high availability across regions, potentially. Less of an issue up there because obviously you've got the availability zones, which gives you a high degree of resilience within a region. So again, think about what those needs are and take that on-premises mindset and adjust it accordingly. I don't know if you've got any sort of customers that you've worked with around the sort of scalability and operational resilience element.
That's an always question by the customers. How do I scale my database? Do I do vertical scaling or do I do horizontal scaling? Do I do multi-AZ? Do I do multi-region? Right? So we need to understand the requirement, and then even after post-migration, sometimes there is an architecture changes happening just to make sure the scalability requirement are met.
So, do you want to talk to the last point of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that AWS can help with when it comes to compared to the sort of other options?
Yeah, so post-migration, sometimes if you're running on EC2, like when reality comes every second Tuesday, Microsoft releases a patch, and then now you have to apply patch to hundreds of servers. How are you going to automate that, right? So using System Manager, System Manager, I love that tool because it has like so many freebies. You can do auto patches, you can run your any PowerShell scripts. It has 145 plus inbuilt documents that can help you maintain and manage your EC2. So a lot of these things customers are not aware. Post-migration challenge, right? After the migrate, they said, okay, I don't know, how do I do this? Right? So that's where we have to consider in our planning as well.
Yep. So we think about those toolings and service options that we have available once we're up there and we're operating in the cloud. I mean, you've covered License Manager.
Yeah, License Manager is a free service. It allows you to store your licenses, and at the same time you can get a compliance report and you can distribute the license to a specific server as well. So it's a one-stop shop for your licensing needs.
Yeah. So I mean, I've used License Manager before, and it really does. When I was responsible for licensing my estate as a customer, having everything documented like that, rather than the purchasing department have got some information here and that team's got some information there, bringing it all into one place. And again, it's like I know where I'm over, I know where I'm under, what I'm using effectively. That can be really, really powerful because again, you can start thinking about optimizing your license count with Microsoft when it comes to things like true up or whatever at the end of your software assurance periods where you come into the renewals and things like that. Systems Manager, again, is an interesting one. Really, really powerful. I don't know if you want to cover a couple of points on that.
Yeah, Patch Manager, Run Command, PowerShell scripts, inventory, a lot of options. You have Fleet Manager. You can even connect your RDP to your server using System Manager.
So again, it becomes a sort of management console for, you can centralize that. So from a governance perspective as well, you can start sort of controlling how we're going to go in, how we're going to access things. It gives you, again, that one page to understand what is the estate. CloudWatch, which is the cloud native monitoring solution for AWS as well. Then you come into third-party products like Redgate Monitor, again, where we have that one single pane of glass, and it's all for what we're looking at for on-premises. In the cloud, we've got hybrid options there as well. Flyway, if you start doing database projects and what have you. Modernization, again, start thinking about how you're going to make use of cloud-native tech, auto-scaling capabilities, multi-region, multi-AZ, application modernization as well, database engines, so you can take
So
JSON.
once you migrate to the cloud, right, so this past summit, 10 years ago was SQL Server Summit. How many of you were here 10 years ago, right? It was only SQL Server Summit, but today is like a data conference. It became a data summit, right? So you have a Postgres, you have a Power BI, you have other sessions which integrate with the data, not only SQL Server. Same thing, once you migrate to SQL Server, you have to think about how do I move ahead from this now? How do I modernize? How do I maybe take a piece of data and how do I integrate with other databases like maybe DynamoDB or Redshift, or how do I do my analytics on this? So think broader about the different services. So that's the next step to modernize and look beyond what you have for SQL Server.
Exactly. Making use of the right database engine for the right type of workload. makes life a lot easier. And again, you did a session earlier about generative AI with SQL Server and some of the capabilities there and how it can help. I don't know if you'll quickly cover that before we move
Yeah,
on.
earlier this morning we had a full house session on generative AI for SQL Server. We talked about Amazon Bedrock and Q. And amazing thing is like, even when I was doing my demo, I didn't know that the great thing it came up is like, can you find out a fragmented dation in my database and write a script to fix it for all user database? Just within less than a second, it gave me the whole working script. Backup to S3, backup restore from S3. I was just trying to put a data model and said generate a code out of this. Just 50 tables data model, it generated me store procedures for insert, select, update, delete, combining different combinations. So I was amazed to see the capability the SQL Server you can do with Gen AI, like not only code generation, you can do it for natural language query processing kind of thing as well. Chatbot, accessing your SQL Server database and create a chatbot. Quick site for Q. You can run that with your reporting and integrate that kind of chatbot thing. Bedrock has an own different models that you can integrate. So there are so many things you can do. One of them is a vector store. IDS has a vector store as well for SQL Server. So Gen AI is a feature, I think, but I'm not going to cover all the session. But yeah, check for that recording if you get access to it. It was an interesting one.
So I mean, just to wrap up now, you've got a good customer statement about
Yeah, so
modernization.
BMC is a customer. They were running first of all SQL Server on EC2, and then they moved their SQL from EC2 to Aurora, and they got the better stability, they got the better performance and scalability. They don't need to worry about performance. They had real problem earlier. So they got 60 to 70% reduction in the cost by just moving to Aurora, right? Because SQL is, again, even if you run SQL on 2 vCPU, you still need to pay for 4 vCPU license. Minimum license is for vCPU. Enterprise edition is like around $17,000 something. Standard, like, so you pay that much in just 2 core. Imagine like you're running hundreds of SQL servers, how much you have to pay for licensing. Sometimes company does not realize that because they have this enterprise agreement signed already, they don't consider that licensing cost part of running SQL Server. But you need to consider that because every year you have to pay for software assurance as well, right? So eventually plan to modernize to SQL Server if you can. I have a customer, the largest customer in Canada, running so many workload on AWS. They cannot modernize their application, but we have to see where they can do next. Maybe next version of their application is going to deploy it into cloud native, where it's going to be modernized, right? So that is the message, is like customers are moving. The BNC was one of the examples that they got the cost savings. I think we have a demo to...
Yeah, I've got a quick demo for...
Quick demo for Redgate.
We talked about going on to the monitoring. We've done the assessment pieces and things like that. If you give me 1 second to...
Any questions, anyone, while we are pulling up the demo on migrating SQL Server, assessment, pre-migration, post-migration, RDS, EC2, Aurora? I know there's a lot of information if you are just hearing this for the first time.
So, just a quick one whilst we look at this. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the key thing to understand here is when you start looking at things, really we've spoken about memory, CPU, throughput, weight stats. Getting all that information over a longer period of time can be very important. Monitoring consistently over a period of time with perfmon can be painful. I've built collector sets in the past, automate the generation, creation, start, stop of them, roll them over, but then you've got to do all the post-processing graphs yourselves. But yeah, key things here, look for CPU utilization, understand how you've got, I mean, if we look at this one here, you can see we've got spikes, but we have got potential sort of overhead where we can bring that down. We start going further down, we start looking at our expensive queries. Again, what have we got? Duration, time. This is where you're going to come in and start thinking about that performance overhead that we want. This is how long the query takes on premises at the moment. When we start moving to the cloud, how long is it going to take when we get there? What's the acceptable delta, potentially? Okay, do they run the same? How much CPU time are they using? Logical reads. This is where can we identify optimizations? Do I want to do less reads? That way I can go to a smaller class of VM. I spend less money because I've got an optimization there in the infrastructure. TempDB is an interesting one. I know there's a, where's it gone? TempDB. There we go. Start thinking about how it's being used, not just from potential objects in there, you may be having spills, okay, think about that. But also think, have you got workloads using version store? That can be also very, very important to understand.
I have a question. Can you integrate this monitoring to send you an alert as well?
Yep, we've got all the alerts for it as well. So when you get to the optimized piece, like you said earlier, you're going to say, okay, well, in that scenario, let me know as soon as the problem. I did a migration once back in the day, all went really well. Hands, went back home, 3 o'clock in the morning, my BlackBerry went off. I'm still scarred by that horrible screech for their text messages. But going back in and had a major outage and we ended up 2 weeks working with Microsoft trying to figure out what the issue was with a bug that we hit in their code that meant we were just ending up with hanging threads that we couldn't kill. So again, that sort of thing, we got that through the notification mechanism and the alerts. So again, think about how that's going to work. You're blocking, locking, that type of thing. Again, think about the workloads. You don't want to over-provision. You don't want to under-provision. You want to make sure you've got the right workload in place. So do monitoring effectively. There is the CloudWatch, which is built in. But again, if you want that single pane of glass, what was happening before, what's happening after, that's where tools like this can help as well. So what we'll do now is quickly... Sorry.
Can you also get the query details?
Get the query
you
details
can
for
get the blocking
Yeah.
querying. Yeah, can you show that?
So, see if
So
I've
one
got
thing I would
some.
ask my customer about monitoring is check the weight stats. That's very important.
Sorry.
Where is
Yeah.
the maximum weight happening for your resources? That's how you can determine whether
Yeah.
you have issue with memory, CPU, IOPS, or network, right?
Yeah.
So you can get weight stats here as well.
So here we've got, blocking chain. We can see what's in there. You can see the queries. You can see the commands and bits and pieces. Just makes life a little bit easier. You can do this yourself, okay? I am a vendor, and I would love to sell you monitoring tools all day long, but you can do this yourself. You can get the DMVs. Just be aware, it's a build and buy. Do you want to offload that hassle to us or do it yourself? But you can do it. But nice, pretty pictures make my life a lot easier. Cool. So, finish off the slide deck for us all. Give me 1 second. And really, just to wrap it up, we've got some QR codes there for additional resources, for things like the Orchestrator Hub, Migration User Guide, Migration Hub, FAQs and bits and pieces. Really, really useful. The slide deck will be available, so you can get that down. You'll have all the links available. But yeah, I mean, overall, really, just a case of plan, prepare, practice, iterate, automate wherever you can. Okay, that's going to make your migration a lot better. Make sure you've got those hard numbers, you've scoped everything out. With that, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We'll be here to answer questions for a little bit while longer. We'll be around for the whole day. Sorry.
Yeah,
Back to the
Seamus
previous
wants
slide.
to take a picture. No,
yeah.
just move one slide back. He wants to take a picture.
There you go. Not a problem. Done? Cool. And with that, one last thing I would say is feedback's really important. Please provide that to us. If we've done stuff well, let us know. We'll continue doing that. If there's areas you think that we could improve, like how you could have explained that concept a little bit better, that's really good actionable feedback for us as well. And also give the event feedback so that they can make sure they know what they're doing well and areas that they can potentially improve in future. With that, thank you very much.